So I always had that in the back of my head. And I knew that this one person wasn't going to make me quit on myself. You know, my dad's my contractor. I have an electrician. I have an HVAC guy. I have a whole team of professionals here that I rely on to make my business successful. So I didn't want to have to start from scratch elsewhere.
Have you ever considered renting in tenant-friendly states? If so, this is an episode you definitely want to check in on, because today we're going to be talking with Cynthia about the trials and tribulations she's had overcoming certain restrictions in markets. Cynthia, how you doing today?
Great. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thank you for donating your time here to help out the larger Lady Landlords community. I appreciate that. Why don't you just take a second and just introduce yourself to our audience here so they know who you, Cynthia, the woman behind the real estate investor, is.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So as you said, I'm Cynthia. My family and friends affectionately call me Cindy or Cindy Girl. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I currently reside in Prince George's County, Maryland. In my free time, I enjoy spending time with my family and friends, serving my community, and anything food related. So whether it be cooking, eating, trying new restaurants, going to food festivals, if food is involved, count me
in. So here we are in holiday season. Any special dish that you make during this time of year?
One of my new favorite dishes to make this year is not really a dish, it's a drink. It's coquito. I love making coquito, and I was just thinking wow, I can't believe it's almost Christmas. I need to get on the ball with making my coquito because I haven't made any yet. So I'll be making some bottles of that.
We actually have another Lady Landlords member in New York that she has a coquito company and has won awards across the US for her coquito business that she sells. Wow. So I'm gonna have to loop you guys together, but that's so funny. I'm glad you're doing that. I hope you have time to do that before the end of the year. So fill me in. Where did real estate investing pop up in your life?
I think the seeds were planted relatively early in my life. I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. In middle school, I actually ran a bodega out of my book bag. And that was pretty fun, just being in control of my own business, making money. That kind of honed my customer service and marketing skills. So that was fun. But I think even prior to that, as you know, my dad has a home improvement contracting business. So I used to work for him. That was actually my first real job. I served as a bookkeeper and a laborer. So those kind of planted the seeds for who I am today professionally as a certified public accountant and a real estate investor.
Your father kind of decide you were going to work for his business, or was that something that you wanted to participate in and you wanted to help out in?
I love money and having my own. So I was like, can I please work so I can earn some money? I've always loved numbers, so that came naturally working as a bookkeeper. But I also have 3 brothers who also work for him as laborers. And whatever they did, I wanted to do. I had no problem getting down and dirty with the fellas. It was just something that I enjoyed as a child. And of course, my favorite part of that was actually lunch. We had the best fast food lunches working with Dad. So I loved it.
I'm seeing the connection with food, right? The lunch is there. You also mentioned the bodega. I love that. That must have been such a cool little business to have run. And your school had no problems with you doing that?
They didn't because they didn't know. And so when they found out, they actually shut it down. And then they opened up a store in the school.
You're kidding. They stole your idea. They should have given you royalties or something.
Exactly.
So after that, so if that's what you did when you were, a teenager, those types of spaces, it sounds like that totally set you up then to go into your professional career. When did the idea of buying rentals then kind of pop up again for you as an adult?
I want to say some years ago, actually, my parents and I'm actually my brothers too. We were kind of trying to explore the idea, but we just never really it never went anywhere besides an idea. But then when I purchased my first primary residence, I was ready to relocate and I just seized the opportunity. I had a great property in Washington, D.C. With very low interest rates thanks to COVID. So I just saw an opportunity for that property to cash flow and I took advantage of it.
Good. So this was, I feel like you fall kind of in a similar place of where I was, that accidental landlord. You had your primary, right, in Washington, D.C. You were moving out and then you turned it into a rental, right?
Correct.
When you decided to do that, were there hesitations of, oh my God, but who's going to be living here? How's this going to go? Was there anything that kind of made you take pause with any just questions or got in your way about being able to rent that out?
There was never a pause. There was always some questions in the back of my head. Of course, I had naysayers who were advising me against renting in such a tenant-friendly state or city, rather. And then when I had to decide to pivot to targeting Section 8, there were even more naysayers like, oh no, the stigma associated with renting to Section 8 tenants. So I had all of those things in the background. But I knew from my past experience that, with God, anything I put my mind to, I can achieve. I just, did the groundwork, did all my homework and the research. I told myself I would give it a try. I said the worst case scenario, if it didn't work out, the home will have appreciated. The tenant will have paid down the principal, so I could still sell it and make even more money than I would have if I sold it initially.
Right, right. I like that you really came up with that plan B and thought that through, but still said, hey, let me give plan A a try and rent it out. And then, hey, if I don't like it, if it doesn't work out, I can always switch and I still have a good exit plan.
Right.
So that's also, I think, that financial side of you that thought those numbers through. I have to ask, when you said you had a lot of naysayers, which we all have, that are like, no, don't rent it out. Oh, that's too risky. And it's usually because those people got burned and didn't know what they were doing that now is putting that on us. Do you remember your father's reaction by chance?
Yeah, he was just very excited and proud.
Very cool. Okay. I was curious what side of the fence he was on. Now having rentals, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Now having those rentals, have you spoken to any of those people that try to talk you out of it? And has there been any kind of swaying in their opinion, or are they still in a I told you so, no, this is a bad idea kind of space?
I've spoken to some of them and pretty much have shared my success.
Yeah.
And, they were too proud of me and surprised. Surprised to see that I enjoyed it so much and continue to pursue it.
Good. You're gonna have to send them this episode.
Absolutely.
But I think that's really interesting because once again, you didn't listen to just kind of what like the mass people were telling you. And once again, usually those were people that had their own bad experiences in whatever way. And I get sometimes it can be that they're trying to protect you, but you still have to live your own life and you still have your own outcomes and you still think through things differently. So I'm glad you didn't let those people kind of hold you back in that sense. So now you have this first property, you move out, you're renting it out. Do you remember what you had to do to prepare to rent out that property?
Yes. Unfortunately, at first I didn't do due diligence. So I didn't realize that I needed a business license. There were different steps and processes I needed to take that I just wasn't aware of. Thankfully, I met a realtor through a friend who held my hand and walked me through the process of making sure I obtained the proper licenses, scheduled the different inspections, and did everything I needed to do to become a landlord in DC.
Right. And I feel like it's very important to also mention those are DC specific things, right? So do you feel like it was the realtor that put you on to what was needed in the District of Columbia itself? And then you realized, hey, this might not be as easy as other states?
Yes, it was. She was very well versed in DC law, and she was just a great resource. I still work with her today.
Good. Yes, I know that you've continued to use her.
Mhm.
When you started to realize that DC had their own regulations, they had things that were a little more difficult, once again, needing a business license, which not every state does. Did that ever deter you and say like, maybe I should rethink this investing in DC? Or were you still like, nope, plan A is good return on rentals. Plan B, it appreciates and I sell and I still make money.
I was still with Plan A. I
Yeah.
just realized that I had to do some more homework and make sure that I understood the laws fully so that I wouldn't be subject to getting burnt as others have.
Gotcha. You also mentioned that you decided to go with Section 8 with this specific property. Can you share a little bit about your reasoning why you decided to move towards that model rather than full market?
Sure. I'd actually tried full market at first and I wasn't getting much interest. So I decided to pivot. I think due to the neighborhood itself, that was the main reason why I couldn't attract market renters. And that was fine with me. Again, did my homework. Unfortunately, that first tenant really wasn't the best, as you know. But
We're gonna dive into that in a minute.
but I've learned It's been a baptism by fire, but I've learned. I'm grateful for everything that I've learned throughout the process.
Right. And all of those are lessons along the way. And I think that's what's so important about your story. I think what actually was great was that you recognized rather early on that you needed to do that market analysis and you learned who would be the ideal tenant for the property you had. And that was why I think you were able to attract those that were on Section 8 to then your property to be able to move in, right? It seemed like, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it seemed like at the beginning with this tenant, things were okay. But it seems like as they lived there, you started to realize that this tenant probably knew how to work the system a little bit more than you were expecting. Would that maybe be a PC way to put that?
Yes, absolutely. And just me and my personality, I didn't set the proper boundaries at first. I was too lenient with things, and I made my missteps, and I own that. I've learned from it. But in a nutshell, yes, I think that's a fair statement.
What is the number one lesson you feel like you learned from that tenant?
To properly vet the tenant, it should be a process in place to properly vet them. I think too, I was caught between a rock and a hard place because I didn't know about the licensure requirements in DC. I was delayed in being able to even list a property. So here I am paying two mortgages for a few months. It was starting to hurt. And it was like, well, I got to get somebody in here fast. And it was a rush process. So now I know
Gotcha.
I need to take my time and do my homework, properly vet these tenants before I place them.
I wanted to mention you are not alone in that. That is actually one of the biggest reasons that I see with lady landlords that they end up with tenants that are not ideal because they felt rushed, they felt pushed, and they were in a financial position where they had to get somebody in, right? So I'm glad that you recognize that. I'm not glad you went through the experience, but I'm glad you recognized where that came from. And now that you knew that you needed that business license, that hasn't been an issue then moving forward. But I can see then where now trying to get that license, the time that that took up was your time for tenant screening, was the time for you to be able to do diligence. So why don't you just kind of, and I hate to make you go back and recap that, but why don't you share a little bit about the struggles with this tenant? What were the things that she was doing that irked you or caused problems?
I think the biggest issue was her negligence and just her lack of respect for rules and the lease in and of itself. There were tons of lease violations, negligence as far as maintenance that cost money. Those were the two biggest issues.
Gotcha. Just out of curiosity, did you find lady landlords before you had that tenant or during her tenancy?
During her tenancy. Maybe during the process actually of applying for the license. That's when I kind of indulged in every social media, Facebook page I could find related to real estate and being a landlord. That's when I started as lady landlord.
Okay. And then there was a point then where you decided to join our inner circle. Where was that in her tenancy?
I'm gonna say maybe halfway through her tenancy. I decided that, I really like how this is going. I want to scale, but I could do it better than I did it the first time. While I pretty much did it by myself the first time, figured it out, I worked it out, but I knew it could be done better. So I wanted to streamline the process and make things easier for myself. That's why I decided to join.
Right. I remember a lot of it was systemizing kind of what you had. And then two, also kind of moving to the intentional landlord rather than the accidental landlord. Right. But I do remember like our first few calls, it was just buried in what was going on with that Section 8 tenant. I think that was where a lot of DC regulations came into play. And I think you became very well versed in how DC tenant landlord law just takes place and happens and what's expected. Can you share a little bit about what were the things that you did to become educated on your role really as a landlord?
So again, like I said, joining different social media pages and groups, reading books, listening to podcasts, on my way to work, on the way home, I indulged in everything that I could think of to try to educate myself. I also downloaded a copy of the tenant rights from DC and just made sure I knew and understood each and every one of those.
I think that was actually one of the best things that you did. You went kind of straight to the source, right? You said, okay, let me get the information from DC specifically. And I know you also reached out, and it was interesting because you reached out to some organizations that also helped provide legal aid. And what I know we've seen across the board is that there's tons of cheap and or free legal aid for tenants, but that does not exist for landlords, right? And it's interesting because most landlords are not millionaires and own tons of property. Most landlords own 1 to 2 properties. They're regular, mom and pop kind of organizations, but yet the cost of those legal fees can be incredibly high. And yet there's nothing that either kind of subsidizes or supports us within that legal aid, but there's so much to support the tenants. But I know you were combing through just different requirements that you were going to be held to. And I think that really helped from there. When we started working together, you hadn't sent any notices or any lease violations or anything like that at that point in time.
No, I had not. Like I said, I was pretty lenient and kind of just let things slide. That was to my demise.
But you were frustrated.
I was, absolutely.
What had you say, okay, now is the time that I really got to start sending out these different notices and kind of going after it from that legal perspective, knowing that there also was going to be now added cost to it?
That's when the added cost came, when it started hurting my pocketbook. I said, oh no, I'm having to pay for her negligence and her disregard for rules. Something has to change.
Right. One of the other things that you did besides kind of going right to the source and getting a copy of landlord tenant handbook from DC itself, but also really got to kind of know the Section 8 office and got to know some of the players there. How did that come about?
Just being persistent and not accepting no for an answer. A lot of times you get half answers or maybe incorrect answers, and I just know that's not true. So I'd always go a step above, maybe emailing someone's supervisor or even the head of an agency to get the right answers that I need. And they would put me in contact with different resources that have helped me along the way.
Good. And I think that continued to push the needle forward with that tenant.
Correct.
But as you were going through all that with that tenant, with still the lease violations, there was definitely up and downs through that relationship of other things that happened with her. At a point, you came to one of our calls with the inner circle and said, that's it, I'm ready to buy the next property. What had you still say, I'm still moving forward with this, even though you were kind of bleeding with the left arm here?
So again, I go back to working with my dad and learning that houses aren't just buildings, they're assets, right? We can use them to gain equity or build equity, I should say, generate wealth for our loved ones and our family. So I always had that in the back of my head. And I knew that this one person wasn't going to make me quit on myself.
Say that again. I love that. I absolutely love that it was not going to have you change what your plan and what your goals were. But when you did say you were going to move forward, originally we were looking in possibly other states, right? You said possibly leaving DC. Originally we started talking like DC, then you started talking in the South, and then all of a sudden we came back to DC. Walk me through the thought process of, I clearly know why you wanted out of DC at that time because of the headaches you're experiencing with that tenant. But tell me a little bit about what it was like looking in different markets, especially long distance, and what had you come full circle back to DC?
Well, again, I love being a homeowner, a property owner in Washington, D.C. My rental properties are actually located in one of the oldest continuously Black neighborhoods in D.C. So that to me means a lot. I knew ultimately I wanted to end up investing in the D.C. area. I wanted to stay here. But the cost of entry was so high, I had to explore the options. So like you said, after doing my market research, I probably researched 10, 12, 15 different cities. Mm-hmm. I had thought I made my mind up on Alabama. I found a realtor who I love. She put me in contact with a lender. I was pre-approved. And I started house shopping. I did a virtual tour. And I needed to see and touch and feel the things that I was seeing. I wasn't confident enough to go ahead and jump on a limb and buy something miles away that I would probably not be able to see or touch. And that's just my personality. That's another reason why I wanted to stay in DC, so I could go and check on my properties when I wanted to. I felt like no one was going to care for my property the way I would. So I could hire a property manager, but they weren't going to give the property the same attention and love that I would. I also have all of my resources here. You know, my dad's my contractor. I have an electrician. I have an HVAC guy. I have a whole team of professionals here that I rely on to make my business successful. So I didn't want to have to start from scratch elsewhere. I was going to sell that DC property and do a 1031 exchange elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
but then I revisited something. I don't know what made me revisit, but I saw how much Section 8 was paying, and their rates skyrocketed. So I was already cash flowing on this house pretty well, and I was like, "Oh, this is a money opportunity. Let me stay put."
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed put. I stayed put, and then I pursued another property, as you know, in DC in the same neighborhood.
Yes, I actually really liked that like exploratory period of time for you when you thought about, okay, do I sell and do a 1031 exchange? Do I look at Alabama? Do I look at Maryland? Where do we kind of go in that spot? Because I feel like sometimes realizing that something is not a right fit for you and a no is just as important as finding out that something is a yes. And I liked that you did that experiment and then realized these are things that I don't want. These are things that I don't like. I don't like the idea of having to build another team. I don't like the idea of having to buy sight unseen. I like that you went through that process because now you could say, I'm choosing to invest in DC and I'm 100% confident with my decision rather than kind of going back and forth with, well, I could have done this, I should have done that, maybe I would have done better here. But you went through that process and you were like, nope, these things are all a no. Then therefore I can say yes to this and feel confident in that decision. So then we were back on DC.
Mhm.
You chose to then keep the current house once that tenant left and then find new tenant to move in. You even considered doing some upgrades to that house because I think you were going to add an extra bedroom there and do some other work there to increase that we decided not to move forward with. But then other house kind of came in. So all of a sudden, here we are on our inner circle call, and you come in and you're like, hey, I'm going to buy another place in DC. Let's review this property. And your numbers just blew things out of the water. Were you using that same realtor that you had before to help find that house?
So the same realtor who helped me list my property and vet that tenant, the original tenant, yes, I was still using her. This was our first time working together on a purchase transaction.
Right. So this property you even were able to find on the MLS.
Correct.
Right. So how did it go doing your due diligence on the house this time? Now buying your second property in DC.
It went very well. This was such a smooth process. I'm still like amazed at how smooth it went. Everything just worked out. Everything fell into place. We did have that one issue with the bedroom count, but again,
Yes.
I had the knowledge and the discernment to go ahead and double check that and to verify that and do my due diligence because that would have changed numbers. That would have changed a lot had that number been incorrect. So just being prepared and knowledgeable and utilizing my resources really helped make that a very smooth transaction.
Can you just share with our listeners what the issue was with the bedroom count?
Sure. So the bedroom was listed as a 4-bedroom unit. I was ready to put an offer in. I did my numbers. Everything looked so great. I don't know what told me to. I actually told my brother, I said, God told me to to check the records downtown and see how many bedrooms this unit has. He's like, really, God told you that? I was like, yeah, God told me. So I went online and I saw that it was only listed as 3.
Mm-hmm.
Then I reran the numbers as a 3-bedroom unit. It's still cash flow, but not as well as I would have liked.
Right. Nowhere near
Yeah,
what
it was
Ford
a
did.
significant difference. Significant difference. So I went back to my realtor. She coordinated with the seller, and he said, "Oh no, yeah, it's definitely a 4-bedroom. They just didn't update it downtown." So again, I'm not just going to take his word for it. I made my phone calls, called the DOB, called the Office of Tax and Revenue, just made various calls, and come to find out, he was right. They just did not update the record. So once I made those phone calls and initiated those requests, they updated it in the system and reflected accordingly. So everything worked out.
Right. But that could have been a huge financial issue if then you closed and found out that it was 3. Once again, you were a very fortunate position. It would still cash flow, but those numbers would have been very different. And if I remember correctly, the seller was also his own realtor,
Correct.
right? So there was kind of nobody else for you to have gone to. And clearly, the person then telling you, no, 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 just believe me, it's four, was
Mhm.
clearly doing something in his own best interest, right? It's not like you had then that other safeguard of another realtor that was saying, like, okay, hey, John, I know you're saying
Mhm.
it's a four-bedroom and they just didn't update it, but you didn't have anybody else kind of doing that double check. You had your realtor, yes, but you didn't really have anybody else on the other side. Like, shocking, the guy is going to tell you as the seller and the realtor, no, you should pay extra money because the house is a four-bedroom instead of a three. So, and I also remember when you said, okay, I need to kind of do my due diligence and check on that and just confirm it's the four. Didn't they kind of come back with a, well, we do have, other interested parties. So
Mhm.
trying to like kind of force you, but I think it was like a Friday.
Right.
And it was like a Friday like afternoon, and you were like, this property's been on the market for a while now. There's no way that all of a sudden now that I'm interested. And we were just like, listen, if you are having this issue of being told that the bedroom count is different than what's on record, the next buyer is going to have that same problem too. So I love that you kind of rolled the dice that weekend and said,
Mhm.
no, this is something that's important to me. I know there's pressure. I know I got to make a decision, but I like that you didn't let that get to you and make a decision out of fear rather than the making the decision out of the education. And you gave yourself the time to call, get that information, and then you move forward and you closed in like a snap.
I did.
I love that. So now you close. Now you got second property down in DC. How's that going?
I'm still struggling with the city. They just kind of drag their feet with the whole process, but I've already vetted and found a tenant. I've already went through all of the inspections necessary. As soon as DC updates their records, we can move forward with placing her.
Right. What I find interesting about that is I think it's a good moment to kind of just share a little bit about that Section 8 process because you and I have kind of just whirled our heads around with how inefficient sometimes this is. So you have a tenant that has already said, yes, I want to move into your property, correct?
Correct.
You've done your due diligence, they've applied, they qualified, you are ready to accept that tenant.
Correct.
They are living in another landlord's property, correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. They now have overstayed their lease in another location for that landlord, even though you've already approved them, you said that they can move in.
Correct.
And what's interesting, and I feel like the catch-22 that I want to make sure our audience kind of understands about this is you needed to get the inspection done, right? There are just certain dates that an inspector is going to come out. They have their process for how those inspections are done. But that's now putting you in the position to have your unit empty and you have the tenant living out of their boxes because they're all packed up and have been ready to go for quite some time now, and yet they're overstaying their lease in another landlord's property.
Yep.
Bureaucracy at its finest.
Yeah. It is frustrating, but again, in the long run, it's going to pay off. I'm just trying to remain patient, remain positive. Same thing with the tenant. Thankfully, she's very positive and upbeat. She's just as frustrated as I am. We spoke earlier today, and
Aw.
just keeping each other encouraged. Like we're at the finish line. We're so close. It's going to be there. Today is December 12th. We're hoping that she can get in there before Christmas. This would be a lovely Christmas present for her and her family.
And that's also another interesting point that you brought up there. It's not necessarily the first of the month. Section 8 will work on its own timeline. I have had the same thing where the tenant needed to be out on like the 6th. And I'm like, but I have somebody else to move in for the month. And it's no, well, they can move in after the 6th. Timelines don't necessarily work the same there. What advice would you have for a landlord that was accepting Section 8 tenants? Most of the states in the United States does require us to accept Section 8 tenancies, not all of them. But what advice would you give to that landlord out there that had a Section 8 tenant coming in?
I would advise them to have patience, to have reserves, because again, I closed on this at the beginning of October. We turned in the paperwork October 23rd for this tenant to move in. And like I said, it's now December 12th. So I had to have reserves aside to pay that mortgage, to pay those utilities. This is something you would need to build into your analysis when you're looking at different properties. And then lastly, try to build connections down with DC Housing or whichever housing authority you're working with. Knowing some key players that can get things moving for you is very beneficial. Those are the three things I would say.
That's actually interesting. I was talking to one of our other inner circle members who had a Section 8 tenant apply, and she said that she was just concerned about moving forward with that. And I said, your HUD housing advocates are really also there to support the landlords. Their role is to get the Section 8 applicants placed. And the only way they could do that is to really also being there in support of us as landlords. When I had to go through an eviction with a Section 8 tenant, when I was able to reach out to her, I know it's her caseworker, but their job is to make sure that she has secured housing. So when I reached out saying like, hey, these are the problems we're having, these are the lease violations, here's the notices, here's the issue with the rent she was paying, all those different things, they were really an advocate for me. They were able to go back to her and say, hey, you're going to lose your voucher. These are things that you can't do. These are the things that we need to see. And I think it is really important to have those connections and to get to know the people in your local offices. So that way, when you do have those issues, you can call upon them to really support you. But believe it or not, those organizations are there to also support us as the landlords that are providing the housing. And that really is a two-way street. So I'm glad you just didn't kind of shy away from that, but have really reached out and gotten to know some people there to speed up this process, even though it's moving at a snail pace. But to still be able to not sit there passively, but say, what can I actively do? What can I reach out? What can I move forward with? So I'm glad you took the opportunity to also do that. So even now with this new tenant kind of being delayed and having to go through some of the same hoops that they're making you jump through in DC, would you invest in Washington, DC again?
Absolutely.
And said with the biggest smile on your face, too.
Absolutely, yes.
Why?
Again, it goes back to my pride in being a Black woman property owner in our nation's capital. That's one reason. Another reason, I enjoy targeting the Section 8 demo. Again, I know it has its stigma, but just because there are a few bad actors, that doesn't mean there aren't any good ones. There was a time in my life where I needed Section 8. Unfortunately, I didn't get it. I think I told you the story before. 19, working full time, put myself through college, and I conceived my first child. Due to my own personal reasons, I didn't really want to put him in childcare, but I wanted to continue to pursue my education. So I decided, hey, I just won't return to work after maternity leave. I went down, I applied for benefits, and I told the caseworker the same thing I just told you. And her reply was, oh, wow, you want your cake and eat it too. No, you need to go back to work. So I did what I had to do. I went back to work, juggled a full-time job, and thankfully my mom was able to care for my son during his formative years, so I didn't have to put him in childcare. So it worked out that way. But I just know that there are some good people that fall on tough times and need assistance. And I'm happy to be able to provide quality housing for those people.
Right. And honestly, what you were looking to do to go back for schooling, that's where the support should be, in my opinion, right? You were doing the best things that you could, not only for your child, but then also for yourself and then for your growing family. Like that's completely where it's so sad that there's not a place where we can get support for those that are kind of doing quote unquote the right thing, if you will.
Right.
So I'm glad you continued to persevere, and that's clearly shown in your work ethic and what you've built over the years now. But once again, that's really sad that really the response you got was, nope, throw your kid in daycare, you go back to work in a place where you can't advance, you can't grow, where you can't, maybe I don't know what you're doing then, but okay, hey, stay at a low paying job, stay at a position that does not require skill, when really you were looking for more and you were looking to grow and you were looking to provide and you were looking to put yourself in a position where it would be easier to support yourself and your family. And yet that's what gets turned down. And I think that's really sad. And I hope to see changes in that in the future. Maybe I'm an idealist, but I think that was really great that you went and you asked for the support that you needed, even though you didn't get it. But I'm glad that you went and did ask for that support. And you're completely right. I feel like Section 8 tenancies, it reminds me a lot of the larger Lady Landlords Facebook group. We're kind of like Yelp, right? I feel like you always hear when there was the bad tenant, when something went wrong, but you don't always hear the stories of what went really great with tenants, what actually has worked out and been smooth sailing. And oddly, I feel like that's actually the majority of times. But when something goes bad, it goes really bad. But in general, like there would be no landlords, there would be no rental properties if most of the time things went poorly. You have a new tenant in your first property in DC, and that's been for a couple months now. How's that one going?
She's great. I don't bother
Great.
her. She doesn't bother me. She follows the rules. The house is clean. No complaints there.
Right. And now the second one that's planning on moving in, once again, it's outside your control, but once the city then has that clearance on the inspection that you can move that tenant in, you said you spoke to her this morning. You've had a little bit of extra time to get to know her, to get to know her personality, how she handles stress, how she relates to these situations, how she's handling things with her current landlord, and how she's still communicating with you. How do you feel about that tenant before she's even moved in?
I'm excited. I don't foresee any issues with her. Again, she seems to want to comply with all the rules and regulations, despite how frustrating they can be. She's very understanding of this process. She's never been in, I've never seen her upset or, seen her out of character because of the way things have been going, even though she has every right to. There's no reason that the inspection passed on Monday and it's Friday and you're saying, oh, we don't see it in the system. We just have to wait.
Right. Right. And once again, I know you mentioned a little while ago that it would be great to be able to get her in before Christmas. Absolutely. But also offices are going to close. And then all of a sudden there's just going to be a woohoo, offices are closed. Great, but people still need housing. And I get it. We all deserve a break. We all want to be with their families for the holidays. But also, then why are these things taking so long when it could have just been, okay, inspections complete, inspections passed, let's get this tenant in there. So then that way they can enjoy their holidays with their family in their new home as well, just as much as I can enjoy my time off from my job with my family. So,
Exactly.
so let's hope. I'm gonna need an update from you. I know we got a couple weeks here, but let's see if I would love an update, and hopefully she'll be in. I feel very positive about that because I still think you have a little bit of time, but I do feel like probably following up, call in some of those connections in that office to be like, where is this? Where is the turnaround? And the fact that you had really a full week already with the inspection pass, I'm really hopeful that next week you're gonna get the go ahead and can get that tenant in.
I'm hopeful. I actually emailed the head of inspections right before our call.
Oh, nice. Good.
So,
Okay. Good. And always on a Friday afternoon too, right?
yep,
So then hopefully then they'll be able to get you an answer before the weekend, which would be fantastic. Even if it is like, hey, I can get you the approval early next week, just getting some type of information will be great. Before we kind of wrap up here today, last question I kind of have for those listeners of ours that are considering investing in tenant-friendly areas. What advice do you have for them?
I would advise them to know the laws, to be proactive. When you see something that could potentially become a bigger problem, make sure you nip it in the bud early. And I would say to make sure you document everything.
Right. Those are great pieces of advice. As somebody that invests in New York, who will never invest in DC after what I've learned with you, I will take New York all day long. But I think that those tips are absolutely fantastic. And I'm glad that one, you're choosing to invest in a place that really resonates with you, that fits that mission, that really is a place that you value and is important to you, but also does have good cash flow.
Yep, that
So
doesn't
I'm
hurt.
glad you found that does not hurt. I'm glad you found your sweet spot, Cynthia. Well, Cynthia, thank you very much for coming on today's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. I greatly appreciate it. We will have to get an update from you about when that tenant moves in, and then we're going to start talking about buying the next property.
Yes, that's already on the to-do list. First of the year.
First of the year? Okay, good. We're going to have some really fun activities in Lady Landlords in the beginning of the year. That's also going to help really make sure that we are taking action, taking steps moving forward. So that's something that I'll be rolling out soon. That Cynthia, you'll get some information for, and you're already automatically included in that as a member of our inner circle. So I look forward to having you get your next property now in 2026. But thank you very much for being here today. For all of our listeners, please do make sure to hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. We release new episodes every single Tuesday. And also, if you would like to join in all of the fun things coming up in 2026 for the Lady Landlords Facebook community. Make sure to go get in that group and make sure to follow me, Becky Nova, on Facebook so you get all the updates about the upcoming events. Thanks so much, and see you next week on the Lady Landlords podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Lady Landlords podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate investing journey, visit lady-landlord.com to book a 15-minute orientation call with me and see if you're ready to join our mentorship program. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and join our Facebook group for exclusive real estate investing tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a Lady Landlord today.